What's swinging, everybody? Wargaming guy here. Today, we're continuing to add on to the very first army that I created on this channel. That army is the Orkland Raiders, who are obviously based on the Oakland Raiders. The feel you get from these fellas is tough as nails and crazy, just as the NFL saw the Raiders back in the day, and they still kind of have that reputation. We'll be using some more advanced techniques, since I'm painting some more elite fellas. The guys I'll be adding to this collection are a kill team of Orc Commandos. These Commandos, unfortunately for this video, are almost done. I already built all of them and painted 5 of them. I finished those 5 guys when I wasn't even sure if I wanted to make a YouTube channel. So now, I only got 5 left for this video. So, to make up for it, I'm going to paint these last 5 guys to the best of my ability, using my whole bag to make something really cool. So let's jump right in. First up is this orc with a giant sniper rifle. His head, by the way, I 3D printed, and I kind of think it looks like a crocodile and not an orc. But his pirate hat is pretty cool, so I'll let it slide. I left the STLs in the description, so if you want it, you'll know where to get it. I knew I wanted to use contrast on a few things, but I felt the zenithal wasn't sufficient in some areas. So I used a dry brush with white to mimic the zenithal effect on the places I wanted it to be stronger. This is a great technique if you don't have an airbrush or are like me and just wanted to boost it in some areas. So first up is the Croc sniper rifle. I decided to do something a little different and use a contrast and dry brush combo that I saw on Eons of Battle. Great channel, by the way. I used a very dark brown contrast paint, Ratling Grim, over the whole gun. I hit it with a bright silver dry brush that when combined gave it a dope effect. I think on this first go, I went too heavy on the dry brush, and it would have been better if I didn't put as much on. Less is more for this method, I guess. Next up, I did my usual skin recipe, which is a random green paint that I picked out, base coated, and then shaded the recesses with the dark Roche. Mix an off-white with the base coat color, and add it to the high points of the muscles. Do this a few times, adding more and more white to each one. And make sure you have one at the end that's brighter than all the rest you put on, so you can have a point where they focus out of all the muscles. I think I got a lot better at the recess part, because on my old Raiders, the lines were way too harsh. But now I started using Nolan oil, and the results are much crisper and toned down. For the bullets littered all over this guy, I used a scale model technique, using this Tamiya gold paint with a brown wash from AK Interactive. I don't know what magic they put in this stuff, but it's a lot stronger than usual Wargaming stuff. They might just do that because it's a scale model, but it definitely smells really weird. I find that these make very realistic looking bullets that look a lot better than the bronze ones I was doing before. I think it's fine that they are different, and orcs wouldn't really care what color their bullets are, as long as they're firing. I decided to use his backpack as a warm-up for leather that I was going to pull off on the next guy. So I made some scratches and X's with a light tan to make his backpack look as scratched up as possible. For all their shirts, sleeves, hats, and anything else I didn't really know what to paint, I slapped on Army Painter Gravelord Gray. And sometimes you gotta give it a few coats to get the right amount of blackness. For their grenades, I gave them a greenish gray base coat, then sponged on some light gray chips with a sponge to give them a bit of weathering. For his little pouches, I did a lighter version of the leather jacket technique. You'll see in a sec. I painted the skull on his pirate hat red to draw more attention to his crocodile face, which I want to be the center of the mini. Next fella up is the Commander Orc, and he might be my favorite guy I've ever painted. You'll see why in a sec. His head is also 3D printed, and it looks a lot more like an orc than the crocodile. I initially saw his giant jacket and thought, my black contrast would look really good on it. And then I thought a giant leather jacket would fit a raider so much. So here it goes. I base coated the whole thing in a very dark brown. And to make this as good as possible, I gave it 2 thin coats. I started to give it some scratches on the edges, dragging my brush down with an orangish brown. I put these scratches in random spots all over his jacket. When I felt like I had enough of these orange scratches, I did the same thing with a tan. I put some over the orange scratches and made some new ones with the tan, but I made sure to put the tan more on the edges than the interior, since it is a much brighter color. I also made some scratches in patterns, like an X for example, to add more detail. Lastly, after I felt like I had enough of each color, I put a very light watered down black to darken it a little in the areas I felt were too bright. I think why I like this guy so much is because of the leather jacket. And it was just me using some paints that I could have used to base coat or dry brush it. But what I decided to do with it, with my brush, made it look like that, you know what I mean? I mean, this jacket would get Todd Howard jealous. That jacket even got him
Waiting in the shade cause I'm super hot, boy!
Anyway, I used the same methods on the guns, backpack, and radar. But the only cool thing I did was making a little wave pattern on the thing that looks exactly like the heartbeat sensor from Warzone. I put a little bit of pink around the stitches on his arm and his lips that add a lot of realism and make him look more alive. The only other thing I did that was different than the crocodile was I put the red on the gun after I used the contrast method. These last 2 commandos, I painted with a lot of the same methods, but I did experiment with some things, mainly with the skin. I read somewhere that if you airbrush with contrast, the result is a lot smoother than if you brushed it on. So I blasted him with a green contrast, and I could not tell a difference. I actually had to put some more on with a brush because my airbrush aim is kinda ass. It just made it a lot harder because I had to rebase coat the guns and the base. Some fun things I did get to paint were the rockets. I simply base coated them with a red or orange, then a quick mix of white on top of them with a little sponging of light gray. I did use my old recipe for armor on this guy's helmet, which was a black base coat, then dry brush with a gray and then a metal. If you want to know more about the bases, check out my old video on how to make them. It's a destroyed city base that is easy to make and even easier to paint. Last but not least is a suicide bomb squig that ended up being one of my favorite things I painted during this session. I was so tired of painting black, white, and red that I just decided to say flip it, I'm just gonna paint him blue. It doesn't really make any sense in the Raider scheme, but I just couldn't paint something black for the 89th millionth time. For his skin, if you can even call it that, it's more like scales. I base coated a dark blue and then highlighted with a different shade of blue. The squig has a really weird shape, so painting the highlights was a little tricky, but I just eyeballed it and slapped on some highlights where I think the light's gonna be. When I painted the eyes, I put on a dark red and then a bright red. I used to think that if you painted on a dark red and then a bright red, it would make no difference because the bright red takes up basically the entire eye. I don't know why, but doing these 2 layers just works. I also put on a dark wash on the areas further down, which is an easy way to help increase contrast between the 2 shades of blue. And that's basically it. I'm gonna be honest, that leather jacket took up most of the time. But that's basically it for me. Have a good one. Oh yeah, I just didn't want to paint this goon.